Hey, PreSales Collective, it's your host, James Kaikis, and today I'm going to be joined by Katie Meloche, Senior Strategic Value Advisor at Adobe. The topic of today's episode is career confidence. It really doesn't matter where you are on your career journey. Understanding how to navigate our career next steps is something that's very difficult to do. For many of us, we have achiever mindsets, and we tie our self-worth to our achievements in our professional life. In today's episode, Katie and I are going to get real. We're going to talk about the stresses of a professional career. We're going to talk about how it is difficult to navigate those decisions and the toll that they take on us, both personally and professionally. And so I definitely invite you to listen to today's episode, no matter where you are in your career journey, no matter where you are in your personal and professional balance or work-life integration, whatever you want to call it. Today's episode is a great reminder of how insane the last couple of years have been and how and why we need to take care of ourselves to show up to be the best version of ourselves today and in the future. Enjoy.
It shouldn't take weeks to create a custom demo. You've got a deal on the line, and momentum is everything. DemoStack lets you spin up a tailored demo environment in minutes, so you can showcase your product in the best light on every call. It's as close as it gets to the real thing, but now you can edit content with a point and click to craft a story that resonates. No code needed. This means less time on admin and more time impacting deals. Make the live demo count with DemoStack. Learn more at demostack.com.
Katie, welcome to the PreSales Podcast. How are you?
Thank you. I'm super pumped to be here, and it's a nice sunny day in Denver, and I'm just ready for the warm weather that is coming this week.
Here in Chicago, we had snow over the weekend, and it's mid-April as we record this. I'm ready for spring. I'm ready for summer. Before we got started, Katie, we were mentioning that you actually went to your first in-person meeting since 2019. Is that correct? How was that?
Oh, it was so awesome. I mean, it was cool to meet with people that I've been working with for the last 3 years that I've never met in person on our side, but then as well to just be in a client meeting where you can actually read the room and, struggle with the technology at the beginning and kind of go through that all hands on deck rush phase and you're teeing things up. I mean, I've missed that, in other ways. So it was really awesome. And I got to see my 9-month-old niece the night before for dinner on a Monday night. And that doesn't happen with us living miles apart.
I'm happy to hear all of that. With PreSales Collective, we're continuing to talk about getting back on the road, what that experience is like. 5 or 10 years ago, if you would have said you would have worked with someone for 3 years on a daily basis and never met them, nobody would have believed you. And then you're not able to read a room in a sales conversation. That is something that they teach us really early. But then I think one of the best parts is spending time with family and doing those personal things that are underrated when taking work trips. So I love to hear that you had those experiences.
I mean, just even the conversations when you take a quick break, the side conversations, right? I think sometimes in connecting with people in a different way, that's a huge part that was ripped away very quickly from us.
And I think we forget how valuable and how needed it is, right? It really does give us a level of depth that we can't get typically virtually or on the phone. Katie, before we get into today's episode, I just want to say thanks for all your involvement with PreSales Academy. So I'd love if you would share what you do with PreSales Academy in our cohorts and really why you do it.
It's been super fun, and I have taught the same module for the first 2 cohorts, and I will be doing it again for the 3rd one. So I totally consider it my content now, even though I did not create it myself. But it's one of my favorite topics, and it's how to have a really good partnership with your account executive as an FD. And that's something that I think at first I really didn't understand. And then when you get into really, really great deal cycles, or you get into subpar deal cycles that, you really thought you had a chance at, it just wasn't really working. Teaching the importance of that relationship, because that I think impacts everything downstream in the sales cycle. And so when you're in a really good groove with your account executive, or you learn how to manage or navigate relationships with 5 maybe that you're supporting at a given time, that makes how you show up every day to work look a little bit different when it works and when it doesn't. And it can also be super fun. You can feel really like a well-oiled machine if you've got it down pat. So I really, really care about that content. That's something I feel like or I hope my account executives, if they're listening to this, feel like I've invested heavily in. I don't directly support AEs any longer in my new role, but it is just so foundational as you jump into the pre-sales role. And so that's why and I'm glad they keep asking me to.
Of course. Yeah, we definitely appreciate it. And you're so right there. Just at a local event recently, somebody said, James, like, what is the most commonly asked question around the pre-sales collective? And I think it's the AE-SE relationship. No matter how long you've been in this role or in this profession, there's always something to learn, whether it's working dedicated account executives or frontline management or senior leadership. There's always something to learn there. So I love that you've taken that content very seriously and presented it to our PreSales Academy. It's really important. So last question on PreSales Academy before we get into it. What is your favorite part about being involved with the students?
I think we'll probably touch on this even in the topics we're covering today, but I love that I can show up to meet with the students, their evening session. And yeah, I'm teaching the content, and I think it's really important, the foundations of the messaging to get across to them. But a lot of it that I share are really the stories from the trenches. And I love sharing those experiences because I think they're memorable, just like if you're storytelling in a demo. And then secondarily, the ability for me to sort of be creative and think about what might be important for them to surround this content with. And so last time with the second cohort, I shared a book list that I created that has been a really big perspective shaper for me. So a list of all these books that have shaped my perspective in some way in different facets. So not just in sales and personal development or career development, but as well in like self-care and confidence and other topics that I think will really round out that content. So that's been fun for me. And then I love when they reach out afterwards or connect with me on LinkedIn and in the Slack and let me know where they're going or what they're up to or something that stuck out to them. I encouraged the last cohort. Apparently, I must have been really passionate that night or something, but I encouraged them to take the Enneagram. So one of the guys from the last cohort reached out. He's like, I think this was from you. My mind is blown, and just the awareness that I've kind of gained for myself in taking the Enneagram and all the layers deep that it goes has been really impactful for me. So those things are important.
Well, thank you so much for doing that. Again, it is incredible working with the future generation of pre-sales professionals, and thanks for really giving back and taking it seriously. It's important. But let's talk about you and your career. So you mentioned that you're not supporting AEs directly anymore, but let's take a step back. Talk to us about your pre-sales career journey.
So I spent 1 year out of grad school prior to jumping into pre-sales, 1 quick year in consulting. And I looked around at my senior managers and the managing directors and all the people above me. And I was like, I don't think I want their job when I grow up. So why am I sitting here doing this? And I heard what a few of my friends that had gone through the global sales school program at IBM were doing and what their day-to-day looked like. And I was like, that's a real thing. So I learned about that. And I just thought that it would be such a great personality fit versus sitting in a war room with developers the entire day, which is what I was doing previous to that. And I quickly made a transition. And I think learning sales skills early on in my career, I just knew would be transferable no matter where I went or what I was doing. So I spent, I think, 3.5 years at IBM as a technical seller, SE, whatever they all are. And then I had an opportunity from there to move over to Adobe. And we might talk about what I mean by that opportunity, but IBM had sold off that division of software. And so I was actually laid off at 28. That was not something that I was expecting, but it was a huge blessing in disguise because I got to come over into Adobe through the Marketo acquisition. And so I was an SC for Marketo for 2 years, which was high velocity, just higher volume of deals that I got to work. So tons of at-bats, which I just did not have previously. And then in 2021, I was a Magento SE, so Adobe Commerce. So I switched from all the marketing background I had into commerce. And then last year, kind of after that tour of duty, I was looking at what's next for me because I toyed with the idea of if you can't beat them, join them, and becoming an account executive for a long time. Or potentially, what does it look like to go from individual contributor to manager? And do I want that? And am I excited about that? But within the organization that I sit in at Adobe, there's a lot of opportunity to look at what's next for your growth trajectory. And we have a strategic value group that is part-time management consulting for the org, I would say. And then part-time front of the house working on deals, whether that's a business case or value analysis for a specific prospect with their numbers and their data and past client data that we use. So there's models around that. Or it also could be deal coaching. And so what's the best foot forward for this deal or for the account executive to be thinking of? It's a really cool mesh for me to bring into, okay, I'm back at the house partnering with account executives and helping them bolster them up for, we call it kind of like a glow up for them, right? As they go into a presentation, sometimes working on deals with that kind of executive alignment. So I am still at times presenting, which I love to do. And then as well, just understanding the needs of the business and that business being our organization within Adobe and how do we move that forward. So it's a super creative kind of adjunct role.
Hearing your story really dovetails a lot into what we're going to talk about. Like really asking yourself these questions around your career, what you want to be doing, where you see yourself, and then really taking ownership of your career and making those ideas into reality. So as we talk about today's theme of career confidence, what is this subject of career confidence to you, Katie?
So this was something that I always thought I sort of naturally had. But when it came into the SE role and presenting and being that subject matter expert, and you're a year and a half out of college and sitting at enterprise level accounts and executive, and you're supposed to be the technical one and the most intelligent one that knows all the ins and outs of the products, imposter syndrome hit me really hard. And I got feedback one time from a mentor of mine that my presence in the meeting that day came off as meek. And that really, really stung. I love the feedback. I love constructive feedback. I'm here for it. But that just stuck with me. And that's not how I want to come across at all. And so what am I working with here? Because who I thought I was and how I thought I was showing up, not how it's coming across. And it's really important to know that. I didn't want to go a day further or a meeting further without having that awareness. And so how do you kind of find that? And so I found mine through what I consider kind of a backwards way, but through my actual fitness journey that I was going through in parallel with kind of changing jobs and jumping into pre-sales role, I found a lot of confidence in myself, and that just started to shine and come out at work. I also think it helps when you have more at-bats, as I mentioned, right? The more meetings you do, the more discovery calls you take, the more demos you're a part of, the more you know what you're talking about, the more you know what questions are coming your way, and the more you feel like you can take kind of the liberties to be creative and show up differently and try things. And so I think sort of with time, but also I had to look at myself and say, who do I want to be? Who do I want to show up as? I think for a long time, I would hear like, it's all about how you show up. And I kind of felt like, okay, do I have to put on a mask? Because that doesn't feel good. I don't want to do that. And I realized I want to be myself, but in order to do that and to be excited about it, I have to be the best version of myself. And so that looks like taking care of myself and also taking ownership for my career, because nobody else is going to do that for me.
Wow. That is a really powerful response. I really like what you said about how you thought you were showing up versus how people were perceiving you as showing up, because I think self-awareness is a really critical component to career growth and understanding what we need to be doing to be better at all times, because there's always things that we can improve in. And the questions that you continue to ask yourself around what you want to be doing is important. And getting that confidence in yourself on your personal journey and how it aligns to professional is critical, because you need both to exist. And, as we talk about the why of today's episode, why should those listening, regardless of where they are in their career journey, care about this concept of career confidence?
I think it's really important to care about this, because even if you think right now where you're at today, you're doing the best that you possibly can, there's still going to be some way in which you can grow, you can learn, you can adopt a new perspective. I think that's the whole growth mindset piece. So I almost see career confidence and caring about that and growing further and deeper into that as a way of exercising and practicing a growth mindset. I oftentimes see in the pre-sales realm of the world that everybody is a high achiever and they want to continue to grow and do better and show up differently or try a unique approach or just try different things in general. And I think that's really important. And that doesn't just bode well for your job right now and this promotion cycle and the next review. It bodes really well for those decisions that you're going to make in 3 and in 5 years. Oftentimes, we don't know what those are. We cannot plan that out and figure that out. but it really gives you what I view as kind of a launching point into that time. Because what happens is not only does this help you, but how you're seen and how you're viewed as maybe the go-to person or the choice for that next promotion or that new role or that new team that's being developed, you'll be thought of. And those things all really, really matter.
I really like what you talked there about launching point. Where are you going to be in 3 to 5 years? 5 years ago, no one would have ever thought we had a global pandemic where we're going to be stuck in our house for 2.5 years and the effect that that has on us. And so I want to kind of rewind because you had said something in your introduction about being in management consulting and looking around and realizing, hey, I really don't want to do this. And the beginning of our career is so tough. We're trying to learn what it means to be a professional. There's so many things coming at us. You really don't necessarily know how to handle the work environment and really where we want to go. Like, it's funny, I was talking to someone the other day who's interested in PreSales Academy, and they told me their undergrad degree. They're like, I didn't know what I wanted to do at 18. I didn't know what I want to do at 22. He's like, I'm at 30 and I still don't really know what I want to do. And so there's so much coming at us, especially early on. So how did you navigate that experience at Accenture being like, you know what, this is not what I want to do. This is not where I see myself.
I would say even leaving grad school, I wanted the boss lady career job and to climb the ladder as fast as possible, but also recognize that I needed to earn my stripes. And so you launch kind of headfirst into a role and put so much pressure around getting that first role because it means so much. And what I tell kids now when I go back to Ball State and chat with them is, unless you think that you are at the pinnacle and the height of all you're going to learn and grow, don't put so much pressure on the first role. And I don't know that that can really, really be heard and that can really sink in until they live it. But I really put emphasis on that because there's so much pressure around the interview process and getting the offer and getting the job and everything, which I understand. But no matter what job it is, you shouldn't want it in 3 to 5 years because you are going to grow and learn so much. And I went into my first consulting gig and just knew that I had to earn my stripes and be the person. And so by way of that, I said yes to everything. And pretty soon you're 6 months in and you're like convincing yourself, like, we wanted this, like we wanted it. Everything's fine. You slept in the office last night. Your normal days are 16 to 18 hours, but life's great. It's cool. And that doesn't work for very long. You know, I can totally put up that facade for a while, but by the end of the year, I just felt so burnt out. My health started to decline. And this is in no way, you know, a knock on the project or the company or anything. I recommend a lot of people go explore roles there. It's just a matter of, you know, this wasn't a fit for my personality at the time. And I recognized just early on, if I think about skills, what are the skills that I wanted to develop and then take forward with me from there?
I appreciate you sharing that because, I mean, that's powerful. And saying yes to everything is something that many of us do, even still to this day. Greg McKeown is an author of a book called Essentialism. And Essentialism is a great book that was recommended to me about how to have focus and how to say no effectively. Because you're right, you keep taking things in and putting this pressure on ourselves and we just burn out. It's taking a toll on our mental and physical health. And at the end of the day, we become unhappy. And we tell ourselves, oh, this is how it's supposed to be. This is how I put in my time. This is the concept of self-worth. So good on you for making that change. But one of the things that you mentioned earlier was this concept of achievement and mentioning self-worth. So with the concepts of both self-worth and achievements, what is your philosophy on this topic as it relates to our careers?
I'm a big checkbox and list person. And so even at a young age, growing up in piano lessons and 3 sports and doing all the things and being a well-rounded human in society, you check the boxes on achieved this, did this, went to college, got the scholarship, got the piano scholarship, playing tennis, you know, go to grad school, got the scholarship, blah, 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 right? And so you check a lot of the boxes and in a way you're kind of standing outside yourself. There's some quote, and I forget who it's by, but it's like you're standing outside yourself and kind of hustling for your worthiness while you alone as a person are enough the whole time. And we kind of don't see that, especially if we're high achievers, type A. I personally am an Enneagram 3 to the core, right? So there's a lot of perfectionism in those achievements. And as long as we are checking the boxes and keeping our plate full, everything is great. But in my experience, when I made my exit and then came into Adobe, prior to that, right, everything had just stopped. The job that I thought I had no longer existed. I really thought I was doing a great job there. And all of a sudden you're kind of like sobered up a little bit to the fact of, everything just kind of stopped. And who am I? Because that was kind of what I was left with for a short period of time. And it's interesting. It kind of rocks your world. And I see oftentimes with high achievers that our self-worth is just tied up in the next thing that we're chasing or that next goal we're tracking towards. And I think to some degree, we don't give ourselves enough credit in that we are enough and that we are important and that we bring to the world without having to go hit the next checkbox or have that next big thing we're doing is quite enough. And we can be happy and fulfilled in that. But again, it comes back to self-awareness, and you have to have a pretty high degree of that, I think, to be able to sit with that and appreciate that and kind of hold space for that.
That's really interesting. I'm curious, why do you think that that's the mentality that most of us have in our career, especially that are higher achievers?
I don't know. I think partially because I think we're conditioned in school, even in my family values, right? Like always do your best. And I had an older sister that's a PhD in organic chemistry, right? I was kind of always keeping up with her. And while that's not a bad thing because it pushed me to be better, I think there was always like, what's that next thing that shows that I can be a really good professional, that shows that X, Y, and Z versus me being enough. I don't know if it's part of schooling and what college recognizes as, okay, you have really good academic potential, sports potential, whatever it is. I think there are just kind of societal pressures that sort of come with that. And in order to gain some of the things that a lot of us want, we have to, in some ways, right, just track towards that goal and focus. I don't want to sit here and say I don't love discipline and goals, because truly I do. But, I did have this point in time where I was like, man, everything that I've been working for and me becoming who I want to be has been kind of wrapped in my achievements. And when those things slow down or those things aren't bright, shining stars, I don't really know who I am. So I'm a little not centered.
You talked about how your personal and professional self-confidence started moving upward in parallel. But as we think about checking the boxes, I feel like it's something that we just do so much in our professional life, but just don't really do in our personal life. Do you have an opinion on that?
Yeah, I think about when I was just working, because when I was just working in that year out of grad school, it was all I had time for. I mean, it was 80, 90-hour weeks. It was middle of the night testing UI that was about to get pushed into production, and it was over the weekends. And so I really didn't have an option to be like, do I want to cook dinner tonight? Do I want to work out? Do I want to hang out with friends? It was like, do none, because sleep also sounded great. And so I think by way of not having the ability to have those other things, I realized how important they were for me just to function and to be a happy human with a smile on my face most days. So I think sometimes that, we put so much focus on our work, and especially in a time where everything was virtual, right? It was almost like Pavlov's dog heading over to your computer in the morning, because that was for most people the only connection that we had access to. So I think sometimes we forget those other pieces, but I think we conveniently sometimes forget them because they can be the hardest things to change. So if you're wanting to focus on your health and fitness, or you're wanting to become a morning person, or whatever habit you're trying to correct and change to improve yourself, you've got to be willing to look in the mirror and say, we're not doing that right now. I'm not showing up every day for myself. And why am I not showing up every day for myself? And usually what lies underneath those layers, I think, is a little bit more challenging than like, I'm getting ready for a big demo. So I think sometimes it's hard to see that.
I think you're exactly right. And one of the things that you mentioned earlier today was about the concept of self-care, because I know, in speaking to you even prior to this episode, that this is something that really, really matters to you, and you take a major emphasis on, because to show up as your best self, you got to take care of yourself everywhere in your life. Otherwise, things will suffer, and you can't put your best foot forward in your personal life, professional life, maybe even both.
Yeah. So this is a huge one for me. And, as I started kind of my fitness journey and I saw how that paralleled with my confidence in my job, I actually started doing bodybuilding competitions because I wanted the ultimate test of discipline, because I was great Monday through Thursday. And then over the weekends, I was very subpar. So I signed up for something that I knew would be the ultimate test of discipline, and it is. And I was doing this while traveling for work all the time, but I was choosing that for myself every day. And that discipline muscle needed to be trained, frankly, more than any of the other ones that I have. And that's the biggest thing that I come back to. And I think one of the things that I've talked about recently, especially with burnout, with the pandemic, with kind of coming out of it in ways to where we're seeing more signs of normalcy, there is a lot of stress and I think healing that needs to be done throughout the last few years. It's not to say self-care becomes this new goal or this new box that you need to check. That means you're worthy, right? If I can do a bodybuilding competition, I am worthy. That's not it. It's to say, okay, self-care looks like a lot of different things for a lot of different people, but do you even know what that looks like for you? And do you see it as a way to metabolize stress? A lot of times there are stressful times at the end of a quarter or mid-quarter for SSCs. And we think, oh, just because the calendar has died down, that stress is gone. But that stress lives in your physical body. So as we think of coming out of 2020 and 2021, we're carrying a lot of that still with us. And as now we introduce travel back into our lives, stress can be good and stress can be bad. Our body really doesn't know the difference between them, but we process them just like we process pain in our body. If we think of it in that way, self-care becomes foundational. It doesn't become an option because for us to be physically well, it's important. And for us, I think to be vibrant and to show up for others and to show up for ourselves, that's super important too. We have to put a focus on this. I have different ways in which I do it. And, you probably have different ways in which you do it, but it all matters and it needs that attention. Treat it like a house plant, like you have to love it and give it water and give it sun. I have a really hard time keeping houseplants alive. So I have to work extra hard at making sure, that they're doing just fine.
Reflecting back, with PreSales Collective, we just hit 2 years earlier in April 2022. And what's been really amazing about this journey is that we've accomplished a lot in a very short period. But I will be the first to admit this, is that I have sacrificed most of my personal life for the last 2 years, and it finally caught up with me. I like to think that I'm a pretty self-aware person, but at the end of the day, I took a step back and was like, I'm definitely not being the best version of myself. Especially with the Spring World Tour, like how do I find balance in my life? Because I'm on a plane multiple days a week. I found that I had to take a step back because if I wasn't going to stop and take a step back, I was going to be putting less than my expectation content out there, showing up to my team poorly, and really at the end of the day, being out in person and not being the best version of myself. And I didn't work for the first weekend in 2 years recently. And I realized how refreshed I felt walking into Monday. And it was like, wow, I probably should have done this a lot sooner. And the reason I'm sharing the story is because I've realized that most of us in the last 2 years have just continued to get in this perpetual cycle because it's so easy to be in front of our computer. It's so easy to just work or to answer those late night emails or Slack messages that really we're taking a massive toll on ourselves. And with everything that has been happening around the globe and the lack of normalcy that we haven't had, we've just kind of kept ourselves busy to move along. And I'm the first to admit right now that I probably was not the best version of myself for the last 6 months, both personally and professionally, and had to really sit down and talk to myself to really figure out what's the best path forward to support my friends, my family, business, the community. And it's something that we don't really do unless there's one of those breaking points in our lives that force us to do that.
That's so true. It sometimes does take that breaking point for things to change and to happen. And it's unfortunate, right? Because sometimes that can be so detrimental or it feels in some ways too far gone. I think that there's a lot that we'll learn, especially as we continue to come out of this from a mental health standpoint, but also physical health and how those are tied together. Like brain isn't a separate entity of your physical body. And I think sometimes that's forgotten. And I think everybody hearing this probably has heard all of these things a few different times, but it's like, how do I change that? And what do I do? And I would offer up the one thing that I have been coached on by my therapist personally is to create a nurture list. So I have like 10 things that for me feel very nurturing for myself. if I'm going to slow down and stop and not be like overstimulated with computer or screens or whatever, what is it that really fills me back up? And some of these things maybe take 15 minutes. Some of these things are like a whole half day that I'm checked out. And what does that look like? Because then you can kind of pick and choose your moments or pick and choose from that list. I presented this on a conference a few weeks ago and people were like, well, can you share what yours looks like? I'm like, if we don't know what one of these things looks like for us, this is a little scary, guys. Like, let's just talk about what some of these things could be and get the flowing here, right? Because I think we have just been so used to having a stimulus that if we slow down and stop, it feels a little scary. One of the books I read in 2020 was Stillness is the Key by Ryan Holiday, and I highly recommend that for a lot of people.
This has been really a phenomenal conversation. I appreciate you being open, honest, vulnerable around this topic, because I don't think it's easy for people to talk about, especially for a podcast that thousands of people are going to listen to. You've mentioned that you've made a nurture list. You've really taken control of your personal life, your professional life, and give yourself achievements that do tie to the self-worth, but at the same time, give you balance to bring your whole self to everything that you do. There's definitely a lot of people on this podcast that are struggling to do this. There are people that are early on their careers that really don't have good coaching or mentoring or management to help them move forward. There are people that are been in this career for 5, 10, 20 years that are probably a little bit lost. What advice do you have for folks who maybe are struggling, internally struggling with the point that they're at and how they get to that next step, either personally or professionally?
So many things. The first is I love what you said there about me being vulnerable, because I think anybody that knows me that's listening to this knows that will always be at the table. And one of my favorite authors, she has a TV show now on HBO Max that I think everybody should watch. It's Brene Brown. And her quote is, vulnerability is the cornerstone of confidence. And so pulling that kind of back to our topic today, right? I think in order to have and grow in that confidence, you have to be willing to show up and be seen when you can't control the outcome. And that happens in client meetings, that happens in our personal lives, right? Everywhere. One piece of advice that I completely forgot that I gave on a webinar in 2020 to a group of students at Ball State University, somebody asked me, like, what's your top recommendation for when we get out of the grad program and start our jobs? And I think they were going to think I'd say, like, save this percentage or max out your 401k or whatever. But I said, most companies that you go to will have an EAP program where you can get a therapist, and it's a benefit that is given to you. And so use it like you would your 401k match. And I don't think that's what that student was expecting to hear that day, but I think it's so important. It's so important as you navigate within your corporation and your company and teams. If you're working with humans, it's important in your personal life and the growth and, maybe things you don't even realize you've been through that you should work through because it'll make you a better person. I highly recommend seeking that out, especially if it's offered to you. It's scary, but why wouldn't you? And I love that is becoming more normalized because I think it's really important. So that would be my first piece of advice. My second piece of advice is, I mentioned earlier, when I got feedback that kind of stung, but it was from somebody that I really, really saw as a mentor and a trusted advisor to me. And so I took it seriously. I would make sure that you position yourself with people that can give you that feedback that's important, but also don't get feedback from everybody under the sun, because I think you'll feel more lost than you will feel strong in who you are. So have that kind of A team. I have an A team in my life around my health and my fitness. I have an A team at work. And as I'm looking at navigating my career, there are 5 people on my phone that I call. One's a past manager from IBM that I just think so highly of and has been such an impactful teacher and mentor to me. One is a professor at the grad program that I went through. I kind of have a broad scope, but it's the 5 pillars of people that I've got in my life that I know I can call on and bounce questions and get their feedback on. I think those things are really important. And it's not that you maybe can go out tomorrow and build that and find that. I think it takes time, but seek that out and be intentional with that, because I think that can really help shape your perspective as you're going through and, making changes in different pockets of your life. The last one, and I know this is a little long-winded, but My therapist told me this because 2018 was my 2020 year, guys. Like I hit this 2 years early. Like I got laid off, lots of things happening in my life that were tumultuous, but some of the most amazing things came out of it. Don't turn every stone over at once in your garden of life stones. Choose one if you can, because I think our little rock garden got super rocked in 2020. And I think as we're being intentional about changing the personal, professional, growing in certain ways, look at all the stones that are out there and just flip one at a time. Not many of us can handle with clear thought and intention, flipping them all at once. And so if we can control which ones we're turning over, please do that.
Wow. Katie, this has been an absolutely incredible episode. I really appreciate the conversation. I appreciate the advice. I'm going to encourage all those who've listened to this episode to go and listen to it again and figure out how they can take the advice that you've given us today and put it into their day-to-day so that they could be a better version of themselves. So thanks a lot for the conversation. And thank you again for all that you do with PreSales Academy.
Absolutely. It's been super fun. I'm hoping to get more engaged, but love that content I'm teaching every time.
We're here for you. Anytime you want to give back to the community, that's what PreSales Collective is all about. All right, Katie, thanks for joining us. I'll see you next time. Wow, PreSales Collective. Talk about vulnerability, openness, honesty. Today's episode was a real life conversation around how we need to navigate the stresses of our personal and professional lives. I usually sit here and dissect the episode and give my takeaways, but I'm going to actually ask you to go and listen to this episode again. If you found any of it valuable, or even if you're unsure if you found it valuable, listen to today's episode again with the lens of your own personal and professional life. How can you show up to be the best version of yourself every day in all facets of your life? It's very hard to do. It really is. But this concept of having a growth mindset and self-awareness is extremely important. The one thing I will say is the quote that Katie brought up at the end from Brené Brown. Vulnerability is the cornerstone of confidence. Again, it doesn't really matter where you are in your career. You could be an executive VP of hundreds or thousands of employees, or you can be a new frontline manager, or you could be someone who's brand new to the role or within your first 12 months. Bringing the best version of yourself by being vulnerable, authentic is really, really important. I hope today's episode will allow you to really unlock the best version of yourself. And so if you have any feedback from today's episode, if there's something that really resonated with you, please reach out to me on Slack or reach out to me on LinkedIn. Otherwise, PreSales Collective, I will see you next week.